And the usage model changes over time. And this is the one that catches a lot of people. So over time, let's say that you download some open source that's under the GNU General Public License. And you have a policy within your organization that says, we're not going to use any GPL for products that we distribute commercially. But for any of our IT infrastructure, it's fine. Because we're not going to distribute it, so we don't have the issue. So you have that policy, or worse, you don't have a policy and somebody downloads GPL code and goes into infrastructure. And the person who does it is thinking, you know what, we don't distribute this code, so it's not an issue. Revisions are made to the product. So now you've got modified GPL code. And it's all just internal use, so no problem, right? And the use is by a wholly owned subsidiary. And then the product becomes really useful. That part of the infrastructure really becomes useful. And it was an interface for your agents. Let's say you had some kind of interface for your agents within your organization. But now all of a sudden you have a partner. And you want the agents of the partner to access that software. And now you're starting to cross the line. You know, are these people part of the same organization? And the definitions of who, you know, who is responsible for compliance within the GPL license. Who is the who now, right? What if you have a component of GPL code that's part of your build structure, right? And you supply that environment to an outsourcer in India, or you give it to an outside shop to do development. You have distributed that code. Most likely, you're not going to say, here are the GPL components of our build environment, go download them onto your system, right? And so now, again, you've crossed another line. And then, boom, your organization is sold. And when you're sold, the product is distributed. It goes from one place to the next. And so all of a sudden, the thing that you have to be careful about, and the reason that audits can be so valuable to you, is if any of these things are a possibility to you, you want to be prepared. You want to be in the know. You want to know what you have. You want to know, how it's used. You want to know if it's modified. And so you have that information. If any of these things ever become an issue, you're prepared to deal with them. So what are your options for auditing? One of my favorite experiences, I've been with OpenLogic for just over 4 years now. And when I first got to the company, we would start working with an organization. And one of the very first questions we'd ask them is, what open source are you using? And so they would say, well, we got a pretty good idea, but let's go ask our developers. And so they'd send us a list. And they'd send us a list of 22 open source products. We would take a look at those products, and we would know that within those products there were additional components under additional licenses. So we knew that they really weren't talking about 22. They were really talking more about 80 pieces of open source products. And then we would start involving them a little bit more, and as we would start selling support contracts with them, they would go, oh, do you also sell support for this component, which wasn't on their original list? So they would start with 20. We'd end up with about 120 pieces of open source software. Once we started doing auditing and we started using tools that scan the software, the numbers are pretty exponential. And I've yet to be in an experience where someone comes to me and said, we've done self-reporting, we've done manual audits, we've gone in, we've inspected files, we've talked to everybody that uses open source, we've looked through the tree, we know what we have, knows what they have. And it's just, it's a fact. Scanning is the best way to do it. I'll let you in on a little secret. No scanner is going to catch 100% of the open source today. As soon as we create a fingerprint that will find open source, next week there'll be 200 new open source forks at GitHub that we haven't fingerprinted yet. And you may download it, right? In the next couple of weeks, you may use our scanner, we're not going to find it. Nobody's going to catch everything. And so one of the things that we recommend when you're doing audits is to use a series of tools. You do self-reporting, you do manual inspection, you do scanning, and you use different types of scanning. And so how does scanning work? In the traditional, there's a number of vendors that offer open source scanning tools today. We use basically all these same techniques. We do name matching. If I have a scanner that goes and finds something called log4j.jar, pretty good chance I'm using log4j. Path matching. If I find a path in a distribution that says org/apache/ant, pretty good chance that I've got ant there. Namespace matching, file hash coding. So we'll build numeric fingerprints of the code. So we'll go take little pictures of it and do source block hash matching. So we can actually go down to the snippet level. So we can go down and we can see 10 lines of contiguous code, for example, that someone lifted out of a GPL and stuck into your proprietary code. We can do templatizing of code. So we can take both the structure of the code, and we take variable names, we can take out white space, etc. And so even code that's been modified, there's a possibility that we can catch it through what's called source essence matching, code term matching. And then there are open source tools today that do license matching as well. So scanning tool considerations. If you're thinking about buying a tool, if you think about doing the audit yourself, not hiring somebody to do it, and you go out and you talk to OpenLogic or you talk to any of our competitors that provide this, here are some things to think about, some questions to ask, if you will. What techniques does the scanner use? Does it look for licenses? Does it look for files? Does it look for code snippets? Right? What's the level of granularity? Noise issues, and this is the hard issue, because when we go find log4j, we match that against log4j. But let's say there's another project called Fred, and Fred uses log4j. Well, that's identified as a component of Fred. So do I need to tell you that this log4j file is part of Fred or not, right? And that's the noise. How well is this scanner at reducing the noise? So you don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of time resolving and reconciling the results. What is the size of the fingerprint repository? How often do they update it? What are the technical requirements? Do you have to put a server in your IT department in your company to put this product up, or is it just lightweight? Does it go, just on the local computer where the source code is? What are the technical requirements? If you're going to have someone else do it, some things to take into consideration. Will they do it on-site? Do they do it off-site? Do you have to ship your code someplace? Who gets the results, right? Who's going to be important, especially if it's a mergers and acquisition deal. If you're acquiring somebody, do you want the company that you're acquiring to know what you discovered about their code or not? What tools are used? Is the company coming in just using a single, as I mentioned, scanner, or do they use multiple sets of tools? What are the techniques that they employ in the reconciliation process? What, if any, warranty or indemnification do they offer? And this is an extremely tough issue because, as I mentioned, there's constantly new sets of code, open source, coming out all the time. And we're not going to find everything. The scanner's not going to find everything. But are we willing to stand behind the results that we give you and warrant them or indemnify them? And what is the time frame? How long will it take to do an audit? So actually, I'm moving through this pretty quickly, so I think I'm going to stay on time. So I'm just going to take a second and just see, for the people who are still awake, if there's any questions. Is there anything going through your mind right now?
Just out of curiosity, do you have your own scanner, or do you utilize third-party scanners when you do a scan for a customer?
So we sell a scanning tool, and we use that tool in our audits. But while we're doing audits for customers, we do warrant and indemnify the results of our audits. And as a result of that, we employ a number of different techniques, and we use different technologies. I mean, at one level, we'll do something as simple as if we think there's the presence of some source code and we know how to look for it, we may just go grep files for certain string patterns, in addition to running our scanner. I use Posscon, which is an open source license scanner. There's a graduate project out of Europe called Ninka, which does the same thing, and we'll use that occasionally to kind of cross-check the results of Posscon. So yeah, we employ a lot of different techniques.
You mentioned about logs, and for us, we've been doing some open source auditing of our code, and one of, I think, the biggest problems we ran into is not necessarily just, licensed code problems. The stuff that's apparent, like big libraries and things like that, but code snippets.
Yeah.
Code snippets that like a developer will find on like PHP.net or just some find
right.
blog or whatever, and stuff that isn't like licensed. And a lot of it isn't licensed. I mean, somebody will just put it up there, and then there's a lot of, obscurity of saying, well, what license does this fall under? Are we allowed to use it, or, so on and so forth. So I guess my question is like, are the scanning tools adept to handling those sorts of situations where it's not necessarily code that's part of a formal package, but it might be code snippets